Mission.
Hi, this is Joel Persinger. I'm the Gun Guy. Thank you very much for watching my videos, supporting GunGuyTV, and doing all the things you do to help us stay available on YouTube and Vimeo and Dailymotion, all the various places that you can find us. We keep working at it, and you do too, and I'm very, very grateful. I've got a great interview today with Dan O'Kelly, who has a long law enforcement history, a history with the ATF. He's no fan of the ATF, I don't think, but we'll ask him that question. And he's going to educate me a little bit, and hopefully you may know more than I do, but he's going to educate me a little bit on what ATF actually does and where they color outside the lines and what we can do if we feel like they're going a little bit farther than they need to. But before we do that, there is something I do want to show you, and that is just this little issue I'm seeing in the news a lot, which is NRA's carry guard being attacked in a bunch of different places. New York has already declared it unavailable, can't be sold in the state of New York. California is attempting to do the same thing and chasing it out of California. I mean, you have the two very high population states, and it seems like more of these left-leaning states are going after the NRA and carry guard, I think based upon the way that carry guard is structured. So I wanted to present to you an option which is Second Call Defense. That is the company I use to defend myself if I ever have to use a firearm in my own defense, and I want to suggest them to you as well. They are available. You can find the link in the description. They are a sponsor of GunGuyTV, and they are available in all 50 states. All right, so that's Second Call Defense. Check them out. I think they'll do they'll do well by you because they do well by me. Dan, thank you very much for being on the show. I'm very grateful. It was great to get a call from you that you wanted to come on. I've been looking forward to this for a while. Welcome.
Glad to be here. Thanks, Joel.
Now, I was wondering if you could do something for me. You sent me one of the cases that you did a deposition on, and in there was your history. If you could give me just kind of a brief description of what your background is, particularly in law enforcement, with the ATF and as a firearms instructor, and what is it that you're doing now?
Well, I started out as a police officer a long time ago, longer than I want to tell you, but I was a police officer for 11 years in the Northwest Indiana area, just outside of Chicago. I became an ATF agent in 1988, spent 23 years as an agent with them, and retired in 2011. I retired about a year and a half before I was mandatory to. ATF has a mandatory retirement age for agents because I was offered a position with the Cabela's Corporation, which, if you're not familiar with them, they're not in every area yet, but they have the huge outdoors type stores, hunting, fishing, camping type products. And I was hired to be one of their ATF compliance corporate managers to develop a training program for them and travel the country teaching their gun departments and doing internal audits. After 2 years, they had that training program in place, so I left there and started the International Firearms Specialist Academy, which is what I do now. I'm the director of this organization.
Now, do you actually own that company?
Yes.
So this is something you started on your own. What exactly does the International Firearms Training Academy do?
Well, I saw a huge gap during my entire law enforcement career between what people in law enforcement and the gun industry know about firearms and what they probably should know. They just don't know enough to avoid getting into legal hassles, whether it's civil suit, personal injury, criminal violations, what have you. I saw so many people lose their licenses, get arrested, get hurt, what have you. And it's not because they were trying to commit criminal acts, but it's because of what they just didn't know. So having co-written the lesson plans for the ATF Academy 20 years ago, when I retired, I said, why don't we get this out there? Because nobody else is. There's nothing secret about it, but ATF doesn't teach it. And even if you work for them, you only get part of what we teach. So we're just trying to raise the bar for the gun public, for law enforcement, for the legal profession, for whomever, as far as how to avoid hassles and to really know what it is you're doing in the gun field.
In preparation for this interview, one of the things that I did was send out a question, a request for questions, if you want to put it that way, to my Patreon followers and on my Facebook and Twitter accounts. And I got some really good questions back. But what I discovered along the way is that based upon those questions, many of them were about state law, local law. Some things were about things that didn't seem like they were within the purview of ATF. You were there for so long, you're an expert in this, and so I'm going to ask you to help me understand, and hopefully those who might watch this video understand, what exactly is ATF's mandate? What are they supposed to do?
Well, if you look online, you'll see their mission statement says that their purpose is to protect the public from violent crime and to enforce federal firearms laws, the federal explosives laws, and to investigate bombings, arsons, and domestic terrorism. They also do have some enforcement jurisdiction over alcohol and tobacco, but to my experience, that only comprises less than 2% of what they do.
Well, it sounds to me like, based upon that description, with the ATF cases I hear about in court, that they don't stay within that mandate. They color outside the lines, it seems to me, from time to time. Has that been your experience?
I have seen a bit of that going on. I mean, there are definitions in the federal regulations. There are definitions in federal law that define what a firearm is, what the frame or receiver of a firearm is. ATF also has the group that I'm sure most of your viewers are familiar with called the Firearm Technology Branch. Now it's actually called the Firearm and Ammunition Technology Division. But they make these opinion rulings as to various things, and many of those have become obviously contradictory to prior ones that they've had in place for decades. And that's why there's so much confusion out there, because they say one thing, they do another. They arrest or enforce for things that are not within the definitions of a firearm. And I've been able to help some people by either educating them ahead of time or by clarifying some things for their defense attorney or in the courts. And we've been pretty successful.
Part of that I could stack up just as a law-abiding citizen. I think I could stack up the, we've arrested somebody and started to prosecute somebody for something that really isn't a violation. And I could equate that with the fact that the laws are so complex that the officer or the special agent who made the arrest or whatever may not understand the law fully to begin with. And so I'll give some grace there, but still it damages the law-abiding citizen. My question is, how much of that do you think is actually malicious? How much of it is just accidental, and how much of it is intentional?
Well, I have to couch it this way. What the field agents do, they're good people. I mean, I know a lot of ATF agents, and I have known a lot of ATF agents, and they're good people. I mean, they aren't the ones who are behind what I'd like to describe to you. They are putting into place what they were taught, and some of the mistakes that are made are a result of what they were not taught. It's the decisions made up at the top and the lack of knowledge across the board is what results in, a lot of what I could tell you about. But ATF agents are not, they're not out there. Yeah, we've all heard this, the stories, and there may be a bad egg in any group. I'm not going to pretend, facts aren't facts, but they're not doing things maliciously.
Well, I believe that. I mean, it's sort of like, in a different way, it's like the Border Patrol agent who was arrested the other day by a sheriff for suspicion of murder and having murdered 4 people. A very good friend of mine, probably one of my best friends, is a Border Patrol agent. And we were at church yesterday talking about that very thing and how hard law enforcement agencies work to weed out such people and to weed out knuckleheads and weed out people who abuse power and that kind of stuff. Nevertheless, there are some of them. But I'm wondering, I mean, I'm just going to call it what it is. Dan, you and I have talked a lot, and sometimes you don't seem like you're much of a fan of some of the things that ATF actually does, or a fan of the management of ATF. Am I reading that wrong?
Not really. That's pretty accurate. Let's get to an example to give your viewers an idea of, what I'm dancing around here. Just as a classic example, there are 4 definitions of a firearm under the Gun Control Act. One, which everybody's pretty much familiar with, in essence says any weapon which expels a projectile by the action of an explosive. The second one says any frame or receiver of any such weapon. And it goes on, but let's stop there for a minute. The frame or receiver of any firearm is a firearm. Now it's up to ATF's firearm technology branch to decide on any given model which part is the one that they consider a receiver, which therefore has to bear the serial number, is therefore subject to the Gun Control Act, etc. For instance, with an AR-15, everybody knows that the lower, what's commonly referred to as the lower receiver, ATF has considered that the frame or receiver of that firearm since it debuted in the early 60s. So 55 years running, give or take, the lower receiver of an AR-15 is a firearm, according to ATF. Well, look at the definition of the frame or receiver of a firearm. I won't bore everyone with quoting chapter and verse. I could, but if you look in the Code of Federal Regulations where it defines that item, it says that part of a firearm which houses the hammer, comma, bolt or breech block, comma, firing mechanism, comma, and which is usually threaded at its forward portion to receive the barrel. Well, an AR lower does 2 of those 4 elements. Now, if you look at that definition, twice in it, it says the word and. This is not a this or that situation. It has to satisfy all 4 of those elements. However, it's sort of amusing the way it was written, because the 4th element says and which is usually threaded to receive the barrel. So either it counts or it doesn't, that the barrel has to be accepted by the forward portion of it.
And now the question becomes, because people get arrested for this stuff all the time.
Yes, they do.
Can you give me an example of a case that has actually gone the right way? And I'm going to define the right way for you. Law-abiding citizen gets popped for one of these things. He gets dragged into court. His life is about to be ruined, and because they're defining a receiver as something that isn't a receiver, and all of a sudden the court is now educated and he gets to go home. Has that happened?
Yes, a couple of times. I was involved as an expert witness in a civil case and in a criminal case. Both coincidentally occurred in your state of California. They were both.
Why am I not surprised? Anyway, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Yeah, no, it is comical. The first one was approximately 5 years ago, and it was the Aries Armor case in San Diego, a man by the name of Dimitri Karras. And I saw on the news one day that, he had been served a search warrant in his place of business, and that ATF came in and seized 6,000 80% lowers from him. They didn't arrest anyone. They didn't indict anyone, but they came in, proned everybody out, took these 6,000 items. And the reason they did that is 2 weeks prior, they had come into a store and said, hey, you need to get a license to a license to deal in firearms. And he said, well, I don't sell firearms. I'm not going to do that. All I sell are 80% receivers, barreled uppers, and web gear. So they left, they followed through, and, they hit him with a search warrant and they took these things. He was doing all of these public interviews with the news, and I saw it going on in, social media, and I thought, well, here's another guy getting dragged through the keyhole. We'll see what happens. Honestly, unsolicited, 3 months later, I get a call from an attorney saying, hey, can you make a determination for us as to whether an item is a firearm or not? Well, sure, that's what we do. Had no idea yet who it was. So he sent me the report. He sent me one of these items, and here it is, the Karras case. I looked this thing over, called the attorney, and I said, well, not only is this not a firearm receiver, according to the definition, I said, but if you complete this thing, finish it, it's still not more than 50% of the definition. And the attorney, very capable attorney, he said, what? I said, well, type in this citation in the Code of Federal Regulations. And he read it. And I said, you see that this only satisfies 2 of the 4 elements. And it was sort of funny. He was shocked. He said, can you put that in writing? I said, it's in writing. You're reading it. I said, just this is what's out there, but not that many people are aware of it or have paid attention to what's going on.
Well, which brings up an interesting question. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but it just dawns on me, is an 80% lower really 80%? No,
that is a number that's been used by the gun public for years. The whole 80% receiver thing came out in about 2014. And prior to that, there was no such thing. Nobody had thought of this in the big cat and mouse game that the whole gun industry versus ATF can be. Then ATF wrote this ruling called 2015-1, which said, hey, if you allow someone to use your equipment to complete 80% receivers, then you have to get a license to deal or manufacture in firearms. But to answer your question, no, ATF has never used a statistical percentage or anything like that. They have a process where with any given model of firearm, they will tell you, hey, you can do anything you want to this block of metal or plastic, and it's still not a firearm until you complete these 3, 4, 5, whatever they are, procedures. So with an AR-15 lower, you can do anything and everything to it, but you cannot drill the hole for the trigger pin, hammer pin, selector, or mill out the area where the firing control components go, and it's still not a firearm.
How interesting. Okay, so how does, I just thinking about the questions that I got from people. What are your thoughts on the whole bump stock thing as it relates to ATF, and do you have any comment on that?
Well, bump firing, nobody knew what it was until Las Vegas. We teach 3-day seminars, live seminars nationwide. And in every seminar, I have to make that comment that until Las Vegas, nobody even knew what bump stocks were for the most part, unless you owned one. Now everybody knows. But the fact is that bump firing is semi-automatic, done very quickly. Semi-automatic is 1 shot per function of the trigger, and that's what bump stocks do. They still only allow 1 shot per function of the trigger, which according to ATF legal counsel is 1 movement of the trigger. But rather than picture someone with a semi-automatic firearm just drumming their finger as fast as they can against the trigger, bump stocks or bump firing devices allow the trigger to drum very fast against your finger instead of the other way around. It's still semi-automatic. It does not fit the definition of a machine gun. There are 4 definitions of a machine gun under the NFA. It doesn't fit any of them. And, but now no one likes them. A lot of people, of course, don't think there's any use in them. Well, that argument could be made about a lot of things. But regardless, they're not illegal. They don't violate any present laws. And now you have various states and whatnot trying to make them go away. My opinion is that anything anybody can do with a bump stock that is, murder is already illegal. Shooting someone unjustifiably is already illegal. What does any mass murderer do that's not already illegal? He chose to ignore half a dozen, give or take, laws in committing that crime. So what are we doing when we add another law to the books? We're giving him 1 more crime to commit next time someone, commits one of these admittedly terrible shootings. But you're not going to make it go away. Every time we make another anti-gun law, all we do is say what good people can't have. The bad guys get it anyway. They don't care what the law says.
You brought up something interesting, and that is the NFA, which I'm just going to warn you ahead of time. I'm of the considered opinion the NFA should be done away with, and it should have been done away with a long time ago. But not being an expert, just being the average Joe Blow gun guy, that's my point of view. I also have some other wacky point of views that people would think are way over the top. I don't think that one is. But having said that, what are your thoughts on the NFA?
Pretty much in line with yours, Joel. The NFA is mostly semantics. Almost everything that you could do under the NFA with ATF's approval, you can do legally under the Gun Control Act without the NFA. For instance, bump stocks again. I like to say in our seminars that ATF or the federal government, whatever phrase you want to use, they don't care how fast your gun fires. They care how your gun fires fast. Because, for instance, you could have a World War II MP40, an M3 grease gun, one of those tubular receiver type machine guns, which have a very slow rate of fire. They only fire between 450 and 550 rounds per minute. That's a machine gun. Whereas with a bump stock, you could fire 750, the same rate as an M16, but that's considered semi-automatic. So, if you don't like something, change the law. That's one issue. But the whole machine gun thing is sort of ridiculous considering what you can do semi-automatically. Short-barreled shotguns, short-barreled rifles. A lot of the gun public and the gun industry in the last few years has figured out the whole concept of an other firearm. Are you familiar with what I mean when I say another firearm? That's been the biggest thing lately.
I am not. So
Okay.
help me out. I'm not.
Okay. When you
Probably should be, but I'm not.
Sure. When you go to a gun dealer and you purchase a gun, you fill out a 4473 ATF form. After you sign and date the form, the very next block, which the dealer begins to fill out, it says what type of firearm is being transferred. And there are 3 check boxes. First one is handgun, of course, that's for pistols or revolvers. The next one is long gun, that's of course for rifles or shotguns. And the third one says other. And underneath that box, in parentheses, it says receiver or pistol grip type firearm, referring to things like the Mossberg just in case and what have you. These are other firearms. Now, a receiver obviously is not yet designed to be safely fired as is, but it is possible to give enough features to a receiver. Keep in mind, a receiver is a firearm, right? If you put enough features on that receiver, it is now safely fireable, like a Mossberg Shockwave or the Mossberg just in case, or a Franklin Armory XO26 AR-15 type firearm. These pistol grip firearms, as ATF calls them, they are not a long gun because they've never been designed to be fired from the shoulder. They're not handguns because they're not designed to be held and fired in one hand. They're just a firearm. And as long as they're 26 inches long, they're just Gun Control Act firearms because they're not designed to be concealed on the person. 26 inches being that cutoff according to ATF. So your Mossberg Shockwaves and things like that are other firearms. So take that for instance. Another one is the Black Aces DT model. Here you have a 9.5 inch barreled 12 gauge pump with a 10-shot magazine, 26 inches long. And a lot of people would call that a badass firearm. It's pretty capable of home defense, self-defense, what have you. It's even a good thing for law enforcement when they need a short-barreled 12 gauge. So I also say in our seminars that the government doesn't care how short the barrel is on your 12 gauge. They care how the barrel on your 12 gauge got short. If you go buy a shotgun and cut it down, you go to prison, or you can just go buy one as is.
And not go to prison.
And not go to prison.
How much does politics play into this nonsense?
Quite a bit. I mean, the laws are what they are, and in the last few years, people are starting to realize what you can do within the law. Nothing has changed there other than people getting smarter about what knowledge there is available in the firearm field, which is what we do. Not that we've caused that. But as far as politics go, you have your pro-gun people, you have your anti-gun people. Your anti-gun people, you know, on the fringes don't want you to have anything. The pro-gun people on the fringes want you to have everything. And the constant fight is, how do we find a happy medium in the middle?
Have you had examples or seen examples where politics has played a role in banning something that otherwise wouldn't have been banned?
Oh, probably. I mean,
I love asking difficult questions. I think I just did.
Well, yeah, that's sort of a broad question. But
okay, so let me give you an example. The bump stock became one of those in the sense that once a politician became aware of the fact that the device existed, or once a politician, we have the famous quote by a California politician that this gun accepts 30 magazine clips. You know, so they have no idea what they're talking about. But if it looks scary, then they want to ban it. And I get the fact that when it looks scary, they want to go to the legislature or the Congress and work through the process to ban it. I'm curious if there's ever been an example of political pressure being brought on ATF to ban something because some politician thought it looked scary.
Definitely. Go back to 1994. I forget who the politician was. I believe I know who it was, but short of confirming that, I'll leave the name out. But this person was taking a tour through firearm technology branch at ATF. And as I understand it, one of the firearm enforcement officers had a street sweeper shotgun and a USAS 12 shotgun lying on his desk, working on them for some criminal investigation. They had been submitted by some field agent or whomever. And this politician walked through, saw these two guns and said, "What in the world are those?" "Well, they're shotguns, sir." "You mean like those aren't illegal? Those are shotguns like for deer hunting or for duck hunting or whatever?" And the FEO said, "Well, yes, sir, as long as they're sporting, they're just shotguns." Well, that's all he needed to hear. As the story goes, by the end of the day, he went back to Capitol Hill, made some phone calls to ATF headquarters and said, "Hey, by the end of this day, I suspect you will have made the decision that these shotguns are not sporting, so to speak, and that would put them in the category of destructive devices." So the next thing you know, ATF said these two models are not sporting, therefore they're destructive devices. You have a 30-day amnesty period during which you can register them without a tax, and that 30 days lasted 7 years. They allowed people to send in a form, no tax paid, and register those until 2001. At which point 8,200 of them had been registered tax-free. And the fact is, you can still register them if you find one in grandpa's attic or something. But you have to remove the objectionable feature first, so it's no longer under the NFA, send in the tax this time, wait for the, apply the approval, and then you can reinstall the barrel.
But aren't there other shotguns that are just the same, pretty much, that don't fall within that category at the moment?
Well, there are a lot of shotguns on the market. I mean, the only bad features that these two had is that they're black in color. They have fiberglass stocks, and they have those terrible pistol grips on them that, hurt so many people. Yeah, there are a lot of models on the market that have those features, but that politician apparently never ran into those. And hopefully, it doesn't get any wise ideas, because the whole sporting thing is ridiculous too. If you and I and a bunch of our friends go out and begin a new league where we use these to compete against each other,
that's sporting.
Sporting. Thank you.
That's sporting. Okay, so now you mentioned that rank and file, which I believe, rank and file agents, and you were a special agent, supervisory special agent, I think, at ATF at one point. Rank and file agents are pretty good people. They're just law enforcement people trying to do a good job. I get it. And this political nonsense gets in here a lot. One of the questions one of my Patreon patrons asked was, how does this affect morale at ATF? Does it? And if so, how?
Which aspect? How does it affect morale, Joel?
Political nonsense pushing them one direction or the other, just rather than going and doing their jobs.
Well, in ATF, believe it or not, you have some very pro-gun people. I know some ATF agents that are extremely pro-gun, and when they see something like that come down the pipe, it's personally not too well received because they see it for what it is. On the other hand, you have agents who the only thing they know about firearms is what they were taught in the academy, which is, in my opinion, slightly over half what they need. And so it's yes sir, 3 bags full. When they, there's a new edict put out, they follow the company line and do what they're told.
How interesting. Does this does it change from administration to administration? I mean, for example, we had the Obama administration, which was arguably anti-Second Amendment in many respects. I suppose people could argue with that with me, but they'd lose. And now we have the Trump administration, who seems to be, or at least argues to be, more more pro-gun. Although there are some things I wish that he could get through Congress. Is there pressure brought on ATF one way or the other by these administrations?
Sometimes. I can tell you this, that Firearm Technology Branch, or FATD, again, now that it's called that, when I hired on with ATF in 1988, there were 8 people in Firearm Technology Branch. Today, 30 years later, there are 10, if you can believe that. Apply that percentage of increase to the percentage of increase in anything else. It's ridiculous. And the job these people have is to support all of the ATF agents and industry ops investigators in the field, because not everybody in ATF is an agent. Some are the IOIs, which inspect gun stores and what have you. They support all of state and local law enforcement. They service the gun industry when someone invents something and sends it in and needs, a ruling as to what it's going to be classified as. So to say they're overwhelmed or overworked is a mild understatement. These guys don't have time to come up with new laws and new regulations just to tighten up the industry, because all they would do is increase their own insane workload. Anytime you see something come out of ATF, it's due to pressure from anti-gun politicians above headquarters. To my experience, and I'm super pro-gun rights, nobody in ATF has time to tighten up the gun laws and regs. If you see that happening, it's coming from anti-gun politicians up above.
You just said something, and you've said it a couple of times, which I'm going to say for the average American citizen, and I am one, so I'm just going to speak for the average American gun owner. Let's put it that way, because that's what I am. And if you're an average American gun owner watching this and you don't agree with me, that's fine. There's a comment section. You're welcome to share. But most of the gun owners I run into would say that there's an obvious equation here. Works at ATF equals anti-gun. Works at ATF equals anti-Second Amendment. And what you're saying to me is that there are a great many, or at least a specific, some number of ATF agents who work there who are pro-gun. I know you. We've talked a lot. And I'm going to ask you here in a couple minutes to explain how you feel about the Second Amendment, but you are a very pro-gun individual. How does that equate? What are we missing as law-abiding citizens in our view of alcohol, tobacco, and firearms?
Well, again, let me try to do justice to that. That was a big question. I'll say this. I'm an NRA benefactor, not only a life member, and I have been for a long time. I was an NRA member the whole time I worked for ATF. And, my interest in working for ATF, having already been in law enforcement, was to be able to catch bad guys. I mean, there are bad guys out there doing heinous things with guns. I don't think anybody disagrees with that. And that's who I wanted to go after. But when it came to serving a search warrant on a dealer because he unknowingly did some administrative thing, or maybe it was even a criminal thing, but it wasn't a thing that had a victim, in the sense of violent crime. It just left me with a bad feeling, because, hey, if this guy only knew what he didn't know, we wouldn't even be here. now this guy's life is ruined. As far as the average ATF agent who is pro-gun, on the other hand, you can't afford to get very vocal. I mean, if you're an ATF agent and you make mention that you're an NRA member, you're never going to hear the end of it, if not worse. So you can choose to go after certain cases and choose to not go after other cases. Some agents are assigned to a group that, for instance, specializes only in gang crimes. Some agents are assigned to a group that only works arson cases or bombings. But if you're in one of these general groups that covers everything within ATF's jurisdiction, you are pretty much, unless your boss assigns you a case that walked in the door, it's up to you to go after what it is you feel is worth going after. I can tell you this real quick, and then I'll give you the floor back. Sorry, but there were times when you get these calls where the proverbial grandfather died and somebody found a machine gun in his attic that he brought back from World War II or Korea or what have you. And I used to, you have to go pick it up because since '86, you cannot register the receiver. It's impossible to register since 1986. But I would show up with my toolkit and the person would take the gun out. And of course, you'd never arrest someone in that situation because you didn't find them. They came to you. They're being a good citizen, doing what they have to do. And I'd start taking the thing apart and they would get, what are you doing? Well, the only thing I have to take is the receiver. That's the objectionable or offending feature. The rest of this is just a parts kit. So I suggest you go find a dummy receiver or a semi-automatic receiver, put the parts back on it, and you still have, grandpa's heirloom to put back wherever you're going to display that or keep it. But there's no need to take the whole thing. This thing is a piece of history. In the vein of that kind of thing, I was able to help some people out and be proactively pro-gun.
At the moment, you mentioned that in the company that you have, you train, you teach. I know you teach classes for law enforcement because you've invited me to a couple of them, which I would love to attend. And it seems like every time you invite me, I have a teaching schedule that is all over the place, and I haven't been able to go at this point. Do you offer training for the average civilian who wants to understand these things better, or is it exclusive to law enforcement and gun shops and that kind of stuff?
No, it's open to absolutely anyone. Our live seminars are a 3-day, and it's online too. You don't even have to show up at a live seminar. You can take it online, but maybe more on that later. The 3-day seminar is open to absolutely anyone who is not prohibited from possessing a firearm, because in our seminar, we have the host bring in a bunch of guns. We give them a list ahead of time and tell them, hey, if you have all these things, that will illustrate all of the teaching points. And then during the class, we pass those around as we teach those points. So you handle a lot of firearms. We cover 14 aspects of the field of firearms and ammunition. And we don't teach anything to do with shooting. There are thousands and thousands of excellent firearm instructors out there like yourself.
Thank you.
That's more than well, covered. We teach everything else about firearms that a person needs to know in order to be fully competent. And it is open to, we've had, in addition to, many law enforcement and gun industry people, we've had attorneys, dentists, medical doctors, just private citizens, collectors. We've had a lot of those folks.
It's very interesting to me that you teach this and it's available online. I think that's pretty cool because a lot of people can't travel. They don't have the time or they don't have the money or whatever the case. You said you were going to talk about that later. Could you enlighten me a little bit about what's available there now?
Sure. If you just go to gunlearn.com, our 14-module course is there. Each module has its own video. You can watch as many times as you wish. We also mail to you a 150-page study guide if you purchase the whole course all at once. You use those videos, use that study guide, take notes, learn each individual module at whatever speed you need to do it, at whatever pace you need to do it. And at the end of each one, there is a multiple choice test, and it is not a gimme. There is actual credibility in the certification when you get it because you actually have learned the material. And you can take the entire course online at your pace from home or your office. It's $488, which is lower than the cost of going to a live seminar, because obviously you're not getting the live instructor Q&A and the hands-on with the guns. But we have certified people not only in the U.S., but in several European, South American, Middle Eastern, and Asian countries already, and in Africa.
Now, what exactly is the certification?
It is, once you've passed all 14 tests, we send you the usual swag plus a certificate as a certified firearm specialist. And what it says is we are willing to testify that you have reached the benchmark of being fully competent in the broad range of firearm and ammunition topics that, we require. And well, who are we? Well, our training is recognized as continuing education by the International Association for Identification, or the IAI, which is the mothership for all CSIs pretty much worldwide. It's also approved as continuing education for the American Board of Medical Legal Death Investigators, or the ABMDI, which is the mothership for coroners and their investigators nationwide.
You broke up there briefly, Dan. Can you tell me, you broke up a little bit there. Can you tell me the mothership for what?
The second one, the American Board of Medical Legal Death Investigators, which is the mothership for all coroners and their investigators. And then the AFTI, the Association of Firearm Toolmark Examiners. I'm a technical advisor for AFTI, which are the people who look at spent bullets and casings and guns under a microscope in the crime labs and whatnot. So I'm also a technical advisor for the Sonoran Desert Institute, which is a gunsmithing college in Arizona. And so our training is recognized by some pretty big organizations. We've taught at a lot of major law enforcement academies around the country too, for Seattle, St. Louis, Boston, Chicago, etc.
Wow. Now you mentioned, you've said the word testify, and I did read one of your depositions. You are called to court periodically to do that, aren't you? To be a professional witness or an expert witness.
Yes. We get a lot of criminal cases, a lot of civil cases, whether one company is suing another, whether it's for the prosecution or whether it's for the defense. Anytime an attorney calls us, the first thing it's made clear is that we tell the truth about inanimate objects. We don't know what Joe did to John, or who did what in the commission of a crime or not, but we will help you sort out what is the difference between a grenade launcher and a flare launcher, and why is one rifled and one is not, and what's the difference between a drop-in auto sear and a lightning link, and why are they considered machine guns? The technical type things. So we do that for attorneys, and sometimes we end up testifying in court, like we just did in Orange County for a man in February. What
was going on with the man in Orange County?
This was a man you may have heard of. His name is Joseph Rowe, and he had a machine shop, had an NC machine, not a CNC machine, I guess, but an older version called an NC machine. And he had one of these clubs where people would join the club, buy an 80% lower for an AR, go in there, and they would put it in the machine. He would guide them as how to index it in there just right. And then they would hit the green start button. The machine would complete this thing, at which point, according to ATF, it is now a firearm because it's a lower for an AR. And ATF investigated him, said he was violating ruling 2015-1, which says if you're letting someone else use your equipment to make firearms, then you need to be licensed as a firearm manufacturer. So they charged him with manufacturing without a license. His attorney brought me on as a witness, and I explained these technical terms to him. And again, I said, he wanted to attack the whole 2015-1 ruling about whether or not the legality of Mr. Rowe letting people use his equipment. And I said, well, if that's the way you want to go, fine. I said, let me offer you this. These things they were manufacturing only satisfy 50% of the definition of a firearm receiver, so they're still not firearms. So how did this man manufacture firearms? And it went to trial. I testified. It got very interesting. The chief of the firearm tech branch testified for the government, knowing that I was going to testify to what I just said. And at some point, he was done testifying, and the judge asked him a question. The judge asked, "So I understand there's a witness that's going to testify that a lot of firearms don't have a part which satisfies the definition of a receiver. What's your reaction to that?" And the chief of firearm tech testified under oath that, quote, 90% of the firearms out there don't have a part which satisfies the definition of a receiver, but we have to make manufacturers put the serial number on something. And
jeez, okay.
And when I got on the stand, I was questioned under direct and under cross, and neither counsel had any more questions. I was ready to stand up. The judge said, "Well, I have some questions for the witness." He said, "Mr. Kingery just testified that, quote, 90% of the guns out there don't have a part which qualifies as a receiver, but we have to make them put the serial number on something. What's your reaction to that?" And I said, "Well, actually, he's high on those numbers." I said, "The number is really
I thought
only
you meant he was high.
No. I had to hurry up and finish that sentence. No.
Sorry about that.
He's high on his number." I said, "Actually, I believe it's only about 60% of the weapons out there don't have a part which qualifies as a receiver." I said, "And he's wrong that ATF has to, quote, make the manufacturers put a serial number on some part of a gun." I said, "If you look under Title 18, subsection 923I, it says that a licensed manufacturer, when they make a receiver, has to put a serial number on it." I said, "That man is not a licensed manufacturer, and these items that he or his customers were making are not firearm receivers by more than 50% of the definition. So they don't have to have a serial number on them, even if a licensed manufacturer were making them, which in this case, we don't have a licensed manufacturer. So no, there is no serial number required, and these aren't firearms." I could go on, but
I absolutely love it. You know, and unfortunately, what this is, because it's so convoluted and complex, even this interview is going to confuse the tar out of people, I'm sure. But I'm encouraged that there's more information and training available on your website, which, by the way, if you're watching this, I will have that in the description, link to his websites, to gunlearn.com and so on, so that you can contact Dan if you want to, and you certainly can sign up for a course, go take a live one, or take it online. Dan, we're kind of running out of time, so I wanted to ask you, if you were going to give advice to with regard to legality and how to stay legal or how to educate themselves to average gun owners, what advice would you give them?
If you want to stay legal, learn what you don't know. I'm not trying to sell you anything. I don't care if you look it up online on your own, but it's what you don't know that gets you in trouble every time. Now, in some cases, I shouldn't say every time. There are people out there who knowingly and intentionally break the law, and of course they get in trouble. But you have to educate yourself, because it's like, playing Monopoly and not knowing the rules. There's no way you're going to win, because you can't.
Dan, thank you very much for coming. I really appreciate it. Can we do this again? I would love to talk about more of the stuff with you at a later date.
Sure, I would love to.
That would be awesome. Okay, Dan will be back. I'm very, very grateful that you came, brother. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Keep hanging around GunGuyTV. We'll have more interviews like this. I have a couple of other ones stacked up coming up soon. And then, of course, Dan will be back to talk about this again. Thank you very much for watching. I apologize. We went a little bit long. Wherever you go, whatever you do, please be safe.